Hi guys. So I'm Drew Elgatian. I'm the CSO of Pull the Shoot, and I'm here with the CEO and founder Jeff Cecil here, and he's coming out with a new book here. We're really excited about it, and so we just want to take a little dive into the first chapter of the book, and that is first principle thinking. So Jeff, just kind of wanted to talk a little bit, go through some questions about really what is first principle thinking.
So first principle thinking is this unique way to look at problems. When we look at problems, when we're in leadership roles, there's a lot of times we look at problems and we say, okay, how have they done it in the past? How have they solved it in the past, right? And so first principle thinking actually doesn't do that. It says, let's break the problem down into these manageable pieces and then figure out the best way to put them together. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow the way that it's always been done. And so that's the difference, I think, that really makes a unique opportunity for leaders to look at things. And they have to rely on their team to make that happen, right? So first principle thinking is not about the fact that I'm the leader, I need to have all the answers. First principle thinking is I'm the leader, I'm working with my team so that we can break this down and look at it in a way that's never been looked at before. And just change the way that we're going about it. And hopefully that result is something that's very unique and solves the problem.
Would you say that that has kind of developed more throughout the years, or is that something that you think has been kind of pushed away and not done as much, that first principle thinking?
I don't know that we called it that at the time, but I think it's been around for a long time. And the reason I say that is first principle thinking is, think of Henry Ford when he created the assembly line he was doing the cars, right? Instead of building one car at a time, he did first principle thinking, which was, how can we do this better? And the invention wasn't the car, the invention was the assembly line, right? Which allowed him to crank out hundreds of cars, all one after the other. Or if we think of someone a little more current, think of Steve Jobs, first principle thinking. Why did the phone always have to have buttons, right? He created the touch screen, and it changed the whole entire world of how we make calls now. There isn't a phone. I mean, I bet if I was to give one of my grandkids a phone with a dial on it and our buttons, they wouldn't really know what to do, because it's all this touchscreen stuff. So it's really has changed the way that we go about it. So I think it's been around a long time. I think more recently, it's been defined more as first principle thinking, because it really is a different way to look at things.
Yeah, it's funny how you mentioned Henry Ford there. I know one way that he always went about things is I think he called it the Great Eight. Maybe correct me if you're wrong. I'm wrong, but he would call it the Great Eight, and it was, what are the 8 worst things possible that could happen here?
Yep.
And that's very similar to first principle thinking. So when was like the first time that you kind of encountered this first principle thinking in your own experience in your lifetime?
I would go back to when I was part of Free Drive. For those who don't know, I was one of the co-founders and one of the founding fathers of what we know today as web-based storage. And so Free Drive, back in 1996, internet was just coming out, and we came up with this whole concept of, why do we have to carry around floppy disks back then, of course, to transfer files? Why can't they stay up on the internet? And so we did that. We actually launched Free Drive in 1998 as a way for people to upload files, share files, all through an internet web browser.
And I'm going to stop you there. For those of you that are watching, floppy disk was the original CD. And then it went to MP3 and so just for all those.
So I mean, we had to really think out of the box. As a matter of fact, in our sense, in my world, we created a new box. We didn't even just think out of the box, because it didn't exist. And so we had to come up with new ways to do that, and people really took to it. Within 3 years, we had 18 million people all using it worldwide. So we literally changed the way that people go about storing their files. And to me, that was first principle thinking, because we said, why can't we? To me, it almost goes back to the Walt Disney story. Walt Disney tried to join the circus one time, and he went in to ask the guy, he was like 12 years old, and he said he could play in the band, and the guy said, okay, go to the band and go play. And as the band was coming down the street at this small little town, there was this god-awful noise coming out of the middle of the band, and that was Walt Disney. And the guy grabs him and says, I thought you told me you could play. And he said, I thought I could. No one ever told me I couldn't.
Yeah.
Right? And so that to me, that's like first principle thinking. Don't tell me you can't.
Yeah.
If we want to, we can figure out ways to do it.
So what do you think is some common misconceptions from first principle thinking?
Well, I think the hardest thing you have to realize and go through is when you're doing first principle thinking is you're recharting how to do things. And so now the question is, are we doing it the right way? Right? Is it sound theories? Right? And there's a difference between realism and idealism. Right? And so realism is, what can we really do? Idealism is, boy, I'd really love to be able to do that, right? Kind of thing. And so I think that changes the whole process of when we finally come up with a solution, is it a real solution? And so I would caution everyone to think through that a little bit. Or maybe it's the solution that you can do today, but in 3 months you can change that solution a little more because you've learned more, right? So don't think that, and I use this analogy all the time, don't think that you have to have the Cadillac. Sometimes the Chevy works just as well. And so we start with the Chevy and eventually we get to the Cadillac, but through first principle thinking, it allows us to get there. If we don't think like that, we're never gonna get there.
And then my question to you would be like, for those of you that don't know, Jeff is a boomer, if you couldn't tell, and I am a millennial. So I would say, from my perspective, a lot of people in your generation, boomers per se, don't really have that mindset of that first principle thinking. It's more of a, this is the way we do it, and this is how we always do it. And then kind of my generation, millennials, are a little more creative. What's your thoughts then?
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, my dad, he was a Depression baby, right? So he grew up in the Great Depression, and so this is the way you always do it because that's what conserves and does things, right? From a baby boomer standpoint, we were not allowed to think outside the box.
Yeah.
You know, I tell the story when my first corporate job and my only corporate job was, you know, you go to work, you put your head down, you do your job, you go home, you get a paycheck. That's all they wanted, right? So they didn't allow you to think outside the box or create a new box. And so that's one of the detriments, I think, of you know, those generations, my generation specific, is that we weren't allowed to do that. And so the good news for me is that, you know, I've been 30 years entrepreneurial, so I learned how to do it through trial and error in a lot of cases. But it's been the fun part. But there are a lot of people in my age bracket that never experienced that and never figured it out. Now, for millennials, yeah, I love the fact that you guys are so creative and think out of the box and say why. To me, that's the best question ever. Why? Why do we have to do it that way? Why do we have to conform this way? And I think that's a question we all should be asking is if certain things happen to us do a certain way, why? Why do we have to do it that way? And the answer is going to be, you know, I'd like to look for other ways to do it. And as a leader, I'd be saying, great, give me some different ways to do it that make sense, that are real, not ideals, right? And not ideas. And so that's the pushback I would give you guys is, you know, sometimes the millennials and even some of these new Gen Zers are all thinking about, hey, wouldn't this be great if we could do this? And yeah, it would be wonderful. How do we get there? That's the question. Why do we want to do it that way, and how do we get there?
Yeah, and I think that's so important, and that's exactly why we have these different generations, right? To help one another.
Yeah.
And a key part of all of that is the communication between each generation. And I'm sure that's going to be a topic we'll talk about here in a couple weeks. But and so you talk about you talk about what first principle thinking is and how you experienced it. But how do you cultivate that within a workplace?
So that's all about leadership where you allow your people to have a voice, where they feel comfortable having a voice. You know, there's always you go to these meetings and someone will come out of the meeting and go, well, I wish you would have said this. And you say, well, why didn't you say that? Well, I'm not going to say that in the meeting. You know, I'm not going to be looked at as you know, kind of talking back or this. I don't want to come across stupid because maybe I don't know enough. And what we need to do as leaders is build that confidence in our people, give them that ability to have a voice. I mean, you and I do that, Drew. I mean, you bring up something sometimes, and I'll question things, but you know you have a voice, and you're willing to push back on me sometimes when I say things, and I appreciate that. And I think that's just something that we, as leaders, we need to kind of invigorate into them, is to build this environment. And it's not just about giving them a voice; it's about showing them appreciated. Excuse me, giving them empathy, showing them that they have choices, helping them to be better. You know, being able to go to your people and say, "What do you need to do your job better?" And as long as it's within reason, get it for them and let them do it, right? And support them, and that's when they're going to know. You know, the bottom line of all that, by the way, is trust.
Yeah.
Right. So if we can build, as a leader, if we can build trust with our people, and our people trust our vision, they trust that what we're guiding them to do is the best thing, then the sky's the limit. The sky's not, but that's where we got to go to.
Yeah, I think a lot of, I say workplace, but also really applies in life, day-to-day life, especially in the family. And I've seen that with your family too. You clearly given your children the ability to try new things and to let them fail. And I think that's a big thing that comes with all of this is a lot of people are kind of scared of that first principle thinking because they're afraid of failure. And failure actually is a really good thing,
It is.
That's the way you learn, right? There's a great book, Chasing Failure,
right?
And it's super important to be able to just accept failure, and to look at it and be like, wow, I can't believe I did that. I gained so much experience from that, and I learned this from it, and everything else. So.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned family, and my family, my girls. One of the words that wasn't allowed in our house was "can't."
Really?
They'd say, "I can't do that."
Can they say cannot?
No,
oh,
because our reply was, "You can."
Yeah.
It may not be to the level that you want it to be, but yes, you can. They say, "I can't do that." No, you can. I can't hit a baseball for a home run. Okay, but you can still hit the baseball, right? And eventually, you might be able to hit a baseball for a home run. Just because you can't do it today doesn't mean you can't do it tomorrow. You can do it tomorrow, right? So that's what drives people. Again, go back to Walt Disney. No one ever told me I couldn't, right?
Yeah.
Can't wasn't allowed. And Disney built an empire, and that's what leadership and true leadership and visionaries really are great at. Don't say we can't. Let's just find a way.
Yeah.
When we were doing Free Drive and the programs would come in and say, Jeff, I can't get this to work that way. I'd go, no, okay, then let's figure out another way.
Yeah.
Right? Because what happens is people get tunnel vision, right?
Yeah.
And that's the struggle. They're looking through the blinders in their tunnel vision. And instead of just taking off the blinders and saying, okay, just because I can't go down this path doesn't mean I can't go over here to the right a little bit and then go up and then come back and solve things that way. And that's the way I've always, thought, and that's the way I've always taught my kids and everyone that's ever worked for me is, we can find a way. It may not be exactly what we envisioned today, but I'll tell you by tomorrow, it probably will be.
Yeah, I know we hit on it a little bit, but what are some of like the challenges that come with, not only having that first principle thinking, cultivating it within family and the workplace and self? What are some challenges that come across?
Well, I think the biggest thing is getting everybody's buy-in, right? Because we're doing something different, right?
Yeah.
And so we're breaking this down to the lowest possible piece and then building it back up. And everyone is going to have an opinion. And so as the leader, we have to be able to take in all those opinions, all those thoughts, all those ideas, and then make the best as a group. Again, it's kind of a democracy. It's not a dictatorship, right? And that's what you got to keep in mind. And as a leader, you got to remember it's not about you.
Yeah.
And you want everyone to be involved. So how can we bring everyone's ideas together? And sometimes it takes a little time to work through. So that's a challenge, right? But how can we take everybody's ideas together and allow them to meld into the ultimate solution? And then that'll work. A great example of that is Elon Musk and SpaceX, right? So Elon looked at taking over SpaceX, and then he realized that the cost of building the booster rockets was prohibitive to be successful in space. He found out that the materials only make up 2% of the cost, but that of the booster rocket, right? So think significant amount of savings, when he's able to do that. So him and his team got together and said, when the booster rocket's done, why does it have to either burn up in the Earth's atmosphere or go into the ocean? Why can't we bring it back and reuse it? And so that was a challenge that they had to figure out and work through. But as we sit here today, they've gotten it figured out, right? Which is amazing.
Yeah.
But there are challenges, and the challenges are competing with each other in a sense of, well, I think this idea is better and that idea is better, and that's where leadership comes in, where you can actually kind of take those ideas and maybe it's a piece of yours and a piece of that to create the ultimate solution.
Yeah, and I think that becomes a challenge when these higher level people think that, my job title makes me a leader or makes me, makes me authoritative, whatever it might be, and that's not the case. Title has nothing to do with leadership.
Correct.
And, as, higher up, you should be able to come lower down to help people to get to that stage where they need to be at and help them reach that potential as well. How do you go ahead?
I was gonna say, I've always said that as a good leader, you need to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with your people.
Yes.
And let them know that you can support them. So,
yeah,
reaffirming what you just said.
exactly. So how do you balance that creativity with kind of more, say, realistic?
Well, the bottom line is it's your sound principles of who you are as a leader, and to understand ultimately that you're trying to build a new box in this case, whatever it is, right? And so the balance becomes what's feasible today, and I've said this a couple times, but this is really the answer. What's feasible today, and what can we hold off till tomorrow? Because again, go back to the Chevy and Cadillac piece, right? It's where you can't get caught up in, but I want it to be this. The reality is what can we have today, or by the end of the week, or by the end of the month, and that's the solution today. But don't be afraid to go back and revisit it to say things have changed now. How can we make that better?
Yeah.
But the balance act is determining what we can do today versus what we can do tomorrow.
And what are some like practical ways? So just what would be the advice that you give someone that wants to instill first principle thinking, and maybe they're hesitant to, or maybe they don't think they can do it within their personal life or workplace? How do you kind of get the ball started and rolling in that momentum to have the courage to start instilling first principle thinking?
Yeah, don't try and change the world. Just start out small.
Yeah.
Start out with something simple. Start out with a problem at home. Maybe start out with a problem with your kids. Something just to understand how to go about it, right? Maybe it's a small problem at work, and just let's spend it. And the hard part is breaking it down.
Yeah.
So, getting it to its core. It's like peeling the onion back, right? And get to the center of the onion. That's where you want to start, right? And then you add the layers all back on, but it may not look like an onion when you're done because you've added them on different ways. So I would say start small, and just get used to doing it, because it is again it's this whole leadership in itself is muscle memory, right? We have to learn how to lead.
Yeah.
We haven't been taught certain things, which is why I wrote the book and why we're starting to do these leadership coaching groups. Because we want people to understand what muscle memory is and how you react during situations. And the same is true for first principle thinking. It's like when you have a problem, it's like, okay, wait a minute, let's break this down. What makes more sense? How do we want to solve it? And maybe how should we be solving it? But again, you got to think that way all the time. That's why I say start small.
Yeah, and I like what you're talking about with the muscle memory and taking it into action. I'd say a lot of people have what I would call as a shelf help book. They have a book sitting on their shelf that they bought, and it's life-changing and everything like that. Maybe they've read a few chapters, maybe they've read it all, maybe they haven't even touched it yet. But if they haven't put it into action, there's no point of having it. Right.
Yeah, and it's just practicing. That's again, self-promoting here, but that's why these leadership groups are so important. Yeah. Because our goal with those is to help people learn how to use it and put them into action and use it and get used to you doing it. So.
Yeah, I remember one time and I'm a stubborn male, like most people, or most men, I would say, but someone looked at me and said, Drew, if you're not willing to invest in yourself, why would anyone be willing to invest in you? And they were very right, and it's just, you gotta invest in yourself, and it might not see the results right away, but it's for your future self.
That's right.
And you've heard the phrase, your future self will thank you, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So speaking of future, so how do you see going ahead, first principle thinking, evolving in the future in the coming years and being applied, I guess?
Well, I think if we can get more people thinking like that, let's face it, what's changed from a technology standpoint in the last 25, 30 years is just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
More than any other time in history. And just think if everyone looked at things and said, just because it was done that way doesn't mean we have to do it that way. How much more can happen?
Yeah.
Right? And so, to me, that's my goal is to get people thinking this way.
Yeah. Because
I want them to come up with new and exciting ways. I mean, again, go back to the 4 generations. We have boomers and Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Zers. The Gen Zers are completely different kind of animal in a sense to me, like the way they do things, the way they think. But they grew up in the technology world.
Mm-hmm.
They grew up with texting, with
Mm-hmm.
social media and all that stuff. I didn't. You didn't in the beginning, but now you do now. But it's still one of those things where that's what they grew up in, right? So the way their brains are going to work is going to be so incredibly different. And it should, if we allow them, it should excel things to go way beyond what we ever thought was possible, because their brains are already thinking that way. And now, as the next generation, the older generations, we have to support that, but we also have to harness it and control it, and allow it to grow and to percolate and to build things in a controlled environment. And that's the key, right? So we gotta, I'm all about kind of that controlled environment. Let's not go off and just say, we're going to fly to the moon and strap a rocket to our backs and go. We got to plan some things out and get it figured out. And that's what the one piece that we got to control. But that's again where the leadership piece comes in, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah, and I think even playing off of Henry Ford, right? First principle thinking, right? He really did that with the assembly line, right? But then he failed at it because he's like, no, we only make this Model T and only make it in this, and he failed at it because he didn't. He did. Oh, I do it once, and that's all I need to do it. And so then first principle thinking is kind of an ever. You need to look back. We look back and we said, hey, what if we did it this way? And then you got to 2 years down the road, you got to ask the same question to the same thing that you did.
Absolutely.
Wow, this has been a great talk, Jeff. I'm really excited for the book, and I know there'll be so much more in it, and so really excited for to actually read it all. So hopefully it's not as thick as the Bible, but
it's good. It's called The New Leadership Landscape, Redefining True Leadership, and really is my philosophies and what is required to be a leader. And so I'm excited about it. It's one of those things where you write it and then you come back and you read it again and you go, man, I really like this. This is good. So I'm self-promoting, but I think it's people are going to find it useful. So thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And we're looking forward to our next session here, Jeff. And thanks for everyone for joining us.
No problem. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.